Dimitrios, I'll look at you first. Very interesting. And one of the, speaking from my own perception, and forgive my lack of detailed knowledge on this, but one of the biggest challenges is data understanding what data is in a very simplistic way. And this is what ontologies, broadly speaking, help us do. So, red is a color, green is a color, so red and green are the same type of thing. And that's very interesting. But I think you were going even further, and you started touching on building management systems and understanding within a broader context, building information systems, which was very interesting. And one of the questions I had, and maybe it's more of a general question, is around data. And if you're integrating a network of what data thinks it is, how are you ensuring, or how are you regulating that each of those knows what data is? It's a little bit abstract, perhaps, but I tend to think about, is there a use case for AI mediating quality of data? Because we're all now referencing lots of different databases, and it's more efficient to do that. And I appreciate I'm trying to grasp at these concepts intellectually. But yeah, what's your view on that in terms of, well, we've got this data, how can we regulate it and ensure it's actually high quality?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting question, and I think it's something that I've been thinking quite a lot about. So, I mean, many people, including some of the presentations today, were defining as these ontologies as a very fixed way of knowledge representation, right? What I'm seeing and what I'm thinking is that when we have this kind of, I'm thinking that there is a postmodernist view to how we view things. Each domain, if you like, has a different representation and a different language. And I think one of the things that classical BIM tries to do is try to establish a common dictionary. So Claudio, for example, was talking about the BSDD and all that work that Building Smart is doing, which is great. And I think that is very useful as a way of kind of centralizing that information. But maybe a different paradigm or a complementary paradigm is that we could have these localized, contextualized views, which is how a BMS system is looking at the building, which is very much an ICT view of a building, which is very different to how a building services engineer looks at that building. And I don't think there is one or another which is the correct one. It's possibly that all of them are valid representations when viewing at from one viewpoint or the other. So I think we've been exploring kind of that dimension, that grappling, that dimension, how we can cross-reference. And the easy way to do is to do these alignment tasks, which is quite easy and quite straightforward. But I think there's definitely a way for AI to be creating those links. So in fact, I'm writing just now a proposal which is about exactly that, how to use AI to create and automate those referencing and cross-referencing across different ontologies that represent different domains of knowledge for the same product, and how these can be aligned. So definitely, I think this is something that has not been looked at, what you're proposing, Gavin. And I think it's a very interesting research problem to be looking at it, if you accept the fact that different ontologies could be different valid representations about and discussions about how a building looks like, operates, performs, and so on.
No, very interesting. This is I think it's a perennial problem, and it's something that I think we're always concerned about is data quality, and that's because it so much now rides on completeness, accuracy, precision of data in any system. And as soon as the risk is, and I speak even from a legal perspective, and I know Niall touched earlier on smart legal contracts, there's a great deal of grey when it comes to law and implementing legal concepts, and data becomes a very fluid and a very uncertain concept, and we're trying to distill that down into something quite certain, which is quite a challenge. And I know it's so super interesting to sort of get your views on that.
If I might add to that, is it? I would start by questioning whether that is even feasible or possible, and what it is that we're trying to build philosophically and practically. And kind of going maybe to the technology side of things, what Claudia was showing before was this idea of having an IFC model, but that IFC model having proxy elements or not a lot of semantics contained within them.
Mm.
I think what is becoming very clear is that we're talking about data structures, we're talking about data models, we're talking about information, and pretty much every one of us is understanding something different. Building Smart has worked on that model view definition as a way of formalizing, and now this IDS that Claudio was talking about. And I think all these are very useful ideas and approaches to kind of distill what it is that we're communicating, how exchanges happen, and how we can formalize those exchanges. So definitely, I think there's a lot of scope to be looking into that.
If I can
Absolutely.
pick up from
Well,
here,
please.
I think, yeah, it's been a lot of tedious work to try and bring people together, because then there is this, but what do you mean with that component of the data specification layer? But if I can play for a second the devil's advocate of my own work, I think back at when AlphaGo played that move that everybody thought, oh, that's a mistake. And then, if we bring that back to our community, when is it that the next AI is going to tell us, oh, pick that piece of steel and put it there and see that it's going to be the best choice for you? And everybody goes, no, it's not acceptable because not using the right standard, and they will know better than we do at that point. And so I guess, what Dimitris was saying, that, there might be, there is space here for other point of views that do not fall under any of the current professional hierarchies that we work within, but will tell you, I know better. Our new overlords will make great cities for us.
Our new overlords. There's a dystopian future for all of us. No, super interesting, and I think that leads quite nicely into some of the thoughts I had around your presentation, Claudio. Thank you for that as well. I think if I can put it in quite straightforward terms, you're trying to regulate the capture of information, if I can say it that way. And the reason I say that is because it reminded me of XRBL, which is business and accounting reporting standards, and is now, I think, it's just globally accepted now, if I remember, certainly through GAP and similar. And there is a need for that level of standardization globally, I would suggest, again, to regulate this environment. Have we got the right information in the right place? Is it precise? Is it accurate? Is it precise? And it seems to me, is that the gap that you're trying to fill in terms of the
It is, but I think
policing information, if I can put it that way.
We have been working a lot on the social side of it, though, because in our investigation, we've seen that it's not enough to have a technology that allows you to do that, but it takes a lot of documentation and training and communication to then allow people to use that efficiently and reliably. So our work was always reviewed under this microscope of what would anybody out there in the construction field that have very little IT experience understand of what this requirement means. And so that's been our focus, I think, to reconcile this, to produce a fairly low-level technology that plenty of implementers can bring on, online very quickly, which is easy to understand by practitioners that have very little IT understanding of what IFC is, but also build around this a very tight quality assurance procedure so that the entire ecosystem will be reliable. This was the big, the most, the biggest challenge, which I don't think we've hit yet. To be completely 100% transparent, we still have to work on improving test cases and working on the certification scheme in a way that will bring all the industry into a quality, a reliable quality assurance procedure. And, it's a small component, but then it will have a number of ramifications. I think it's going to be used in very, very many possible different domains.
Oh, that was super interesting. Thank you. And Erica, I think super interesting. And I think back to when I first started working in the law, actually, and I worked at Arup as part of their legal team, and obviously working with structural engineers quite a lot in terms of materials and their sort of perennial gripe around steel and the problems it has. It sounds very simple. I would specify a steel beam, and then they start talking, and you can see it's a difficult journey to choose pieces of metal to do things with, which sounds ridiculous in this day and age. But I can see that there's the risk in taking any materials away is you don't know how it's been. Was it installed properly? I mean, all sorts of questions come up. Was it installed properly? Was it tensioned properly? Did the contractor who installed it originally put the right bolts in the right place at the right blah, blah, and on it goes. Mm-hmm. And so very neatly, your project addresses two critical problems. One is, can we be sure about the performance of that material now, in which your colleagues at Birmingham can do? And then can we create a platform or a catalog where these things can be reselected? And quite clearly we can. And I overlay this with reference to some of the work I've been doing recently, which is around data centers. Now, data centers, they're sheds in fields, not to put too fine a point on it, with a lot of complicated MEP systems imported. But that type of simplicity in design, what I'm trying to get at really is a risk view in terms of what is the risk in using this piece of metal. Well, there are many, many projects in which the risk in using that particular piece of metal is actually very low if all it's doing is supporting, say a shed in a field, I generalize, but actually quite a simple structure, built in a fairly unique, well, not unique, sorry, very, very standard way, replicated design. So is that, because you also mentioned commercialization, which is obviously a big point and big gap between, well, we've got all this information, but now we need to sell it, or now we need somebody to run with it. I just wonder what the opportunity there is. It's almost a route to market question or go to market question for a startup.
I think the route to market is probably another area of exploration, but one clear gap is that the suppliers in the industry currently, they don't really have a particular way of digitizing their steel beam catalogs. These exist in Excel tables, but they're not up to date. They're not real time. So what normally happens is you kind of have to call up and find out what is the most up-to-date information. So it still happens very manually, like a lot of activities in construction happen over the phone. So the same thing goes for steel frames. If you were to extend your house and instead of buying new steel, what you could do is use reused steel. Well, most homeowners don't even know where they would go to figure that out, how to access reused steel members. So, but there's a huge market there, both for residential small scale extensions, but in industrial in particular, because industrial developers are increasingly having to demonstrate measures around sustainability. So industrial buildings, so when I say industrial, it means warehouse or a data center. It's the same portal frame structure. It's typically designed by the same architects who do both warehouses and data centers, and the structural engineers are the same. So yeah, there is that route to market where you have to combine or offer a service to multiple stakeholders. So yes, you could say like a platform business model where you engage both the designers and the steel frame suppliers, and you help them digitize their existing stock. This is a critical element of the platform being valuable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I quite agree. There is a lot of work that needs to be done around that, but I think very quickly you can develop a marketplace, which almost and a digital marketplace. So this in my mind now becomes quite if you imagine like a decentralized exchange platform, and suddenly you've got buyers and sellers. Well, that's all you're doing is matching. This person needs X amount of steel beams in these approximate approximate specifications, what's available. And once you have that matching ability, I think I wrote down speed dating for steel beams. Yes, I did.
Yeah, yeah.
A little bit weird, but that's the kind of thing, and matching it to a project, and there's your marketplace, and there's the sale, and presumably it's cheaper and more efficient to reuse steel beams. You're not paying for the cost of manufacturing or recycling it, which is basically the same cost again. So potentially, projects become a lot more economic. And I know we touched on some of the economics of such projects yesterday as well. The chap from Hong Kong, whose name escapes me, Mike, I think, talking about how do you efficiently just-in-time manufacture delivery? Well, the same principle, isn't it? In terms of
yes, and I'm thinking, Gavin and Erica, that Niall and myself, we briefly work on a project with Tata Steel looking at the same problem, right? And that was interesting, and we had some conclusions there from Tata Steel. I don't know now if you want to exchange that, Erica, if you are aware.
It did ring quite a few bells, all right. I forget how many years ago. That was 6-7 years ago, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, I seem to remember that they were looking at embedding fiber optic cables inside the beams to see if they'd been bent. Yeah. And it was important to identify exactly that steel beam as opposed to any other steel beam, different tensile strengths, etc. But it was the financialization of it, wasn't it? That was the interesting piece there. There
was also some feedback from Arup saying that they could not guarantee the structural performance of that beam, even though they had the node to drill that hole and put a fiber optic across the beam. And then I remember there was what Gavin is discussing, that risk factor there. And I believe that I still then decide to look into cladding systems, right?
Correct. Cladding was the successor, because they were able to do LiDAR surveys on it from outside the building, where you didn't really know what you got until you got the steel out of the building, maybe 30 years from there. We're also looking at marble. So yeah, other building material types, because I think they were looking at it as a financial product. So instead of buying it, it wasn't a capital asset. You were basically leasing it for 50 years, maybe. And then with a view that the price of the asset would probably be more expensive 50 years from now. So a marble floor would cost you more to put in initially, if you're to buy it outright. But if you leased a marble floor, then it was cheaper to put in at that point. And then I think it was pension funds were interested in backing this as a pretty stable asset class. And then when that marble comes out, you scrape off the top of it, and then that marble is probably worth more 50 years from now than it would be at the time it went in. I mean, that was an exceptional timeline, but it could be 5-10 years. But yeah, it was really quite an interesting sort of futures market for physical assets like this. But
I look forward to trading marble futures in time to come. Why not? That's super interesting. I mean, they're very creative, and it's the kind of thing I like about these conferences generally. It's just there's utterly surreal applications that can come out of left field, and you think, actually, that's not a bad idea.
Now, I have a question for Erica. So what is the confidence you have currently with your simulation or twin in respect to the structural performance of that beam?
I think that is better answered by the Birmingham team. To be honest, I'm not going to be able to answer the exact what their confidence level is, but the whole intention of their work at the beginning of this project has been to minimize that error between what they see in the lab and the simulated model to try and get as accurate of a reflection in its digital format. But that's because for them.
Yes, absolutely. Because depending what that gap is, architects and engineers will always have to over-specify the steel. So you're going to have to, because you don't know the performance of the beam, you'll have to over-design it if that gap is too big, right? Meaning that you're going to end up using more steel to design the same building. Yeah, so that is interesting. And if you contrast with, let's say, if energy no longer is a problem. Yeah, so I know a few people in Oxford University, they have a number of startups designing very efficient tokamaks, and energy might not be an issue. Yeah. So you might be better off just to melt it and use the same or less, for example, generative design can drop the use of material by orders of 30% to design the same structural performance. So you would use less material to have the same structural performance when the workflow you're proposing, you would use potentially more material to have the same structural performance. And I'm just thinking, if there is a business, if this is by design, or if there is a business model that encapsulate that extra material that you're going to have on the new building using old structural members.
As a potential business model, yeah, I mean, you can embed anything into digital format. You could base that. You could give a weight to the building, right? A weight to the new structure, and then again assess the structural feasibility of that new design using reused steel members.
Yeah. So you could pay less you could lease it, but at a hold. So you would be buying, is almost like buying stocks.
Yeah.
You would be buying more steel, but then you would have to take a cut.
Yeah.
When it's I don't know. There are some questions that I find is interesting because I've been working on some train design and rolling stock design, and we know we can build the same rolling stock, the same train, using to the order of 30% less material. And that's quite interesting. It would be lighter, it would be stronger, it would save a lot of energy. So I just think that this is something that needs to be accounted for in a proposition like the one you have.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, thank you very much for all the presenters. Really, really interesting. I don't know, Abel, if you want to bring this session to a close and a closing keynote, haven't you?
Yeah, I have a very brief closing keynote. It's literally 5 minutes. It's just to thank everyone. I'm very intriguing with the research from Dimitrios and Claudio. I'm very keen to carry on the conversation. When we develop in the Daico ontology, we're taking a systems approach to understand what we're dealing with and how we architecting those systems. And I think we have all this amazing data, and a lot of the utility that we can lift is from understanding the right viewpoints. So sometimes I think the image is something you mentioned is, is it possible, or maybe it is not possible. You reach a point that you just need to indeed use a different glossary or talk a different language. But I think thinking about viewpoints can maybe lead us to understand that we can deal with a data set with hundreds of viewpoints, and that might be feasible for representing the built environment. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or if you think indeed we'll be like a Babel's tower, and we will have to speak different languages with some AI-assisted translations.
Well, I don't have a conclusive answer, but if I were to endeavor, what I'm thinking is that we're not looking at the Babel's tower. But I think what we went from the fear of being in the Babel's tower to something that is too centralized, and that has worked well, but also it has shown some limitations. So I guess what I'm advocating is that by accepting that different groups of people use different languages to describe things. So kind of a door is a door is a door, but it means very different things to an MEP engineer, to an architect, and to somebody else, and kind of acknowledging that and designing that into our information management systems, that is likely going to bring a benefit. So what I was talking about, semantic completeness and kind of working through that, is kind of that philosophy that, we don't need to prescribe a priori what the information requirements are to a very fine detail, because that hasn't been shown to work in certain cases, but rather take what we have and see if what we have is sufficient for what we're doing. And that might be a pragmatic way that can complement some of the existing approaches. And that is also linking to that discussion about working with imperfect data. The data we get is always imperfect. And kind of the community has always been going to, let's go back and kind of improve your BIM model, and let's do this model checking. And this is kind of the 50 things that go into your BCF report, and you should do that and do that and do that. And that's perfectly fine and valid and useful. But I think in certain cases, we might be able to work with this imperfect data and provide value, and we should be exploring that. How much we can push the boundaries in that direction, because that will make it ultimately more useful and usable without having to do this iterative process, which is tedious, doesn't align well with some delivery processes, and also, and also sometimes when it happens, the contractor has gone and is not there to capture that knowledge. So so these ideas, kind of how they can benefit, I think can complement some of the work that Claudio was talking about.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Claudio, any final thoughts?
No, this is all very, very interesting what Dimitris is saying, and I think maybe we can, find some middle ground. But again, I tend to go back to social issues again and again, because everything is about the incentive structure in the end. Because when you were saying, what would be the viewpoint that we can consider, well, in the end, very frequently depends on the incentive structure of the whatever supply chain or the business or political environment around you, or carbon reduction or whatever, is the flavor of the period. Until the new tokamak reactors are online, then we have to focus on these incentives and make those right.
That's right. Yeah. So it's it's fascinating, and it's not something we can resolve in 2 minutes or a 20 minutes discussion. But I think it's a very worthwhile indeed conversation.